we go. Hi, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to thank Lindsay, Raquetta, and Michelle, who put that wonderful video together. I am so impressed and feel blessed to be able to work with such amazing women on a project like this. And this is just, we of course released, we had our premiere last week. The video is still on YouTube, so feel free to check that out and make sure to share it with others, because I think a lot of us can learn from hearing the narratives and the stories that were shared there. We're now going to move into our next 90 minutes together, where we have a few different activities for everyone. But on behalf of the Department of Learning and Teaching at the University of San Diego, I just want to say welcome to our presentation on Everyday Intersectionality, Dissecting the Intersection. In light of the events that have happened in the last week, but have been happening as well, we wanted to actually just take a moment of silence for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. These are the names of the folks who were murdered, and so I'm just going to be quiet and we'll just take a minute just in silence. Thank you. All right, so we're now going to move on with our program.
Thank you, Dr. Jez, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight for a wonderful event and hopefully some wonderful conversation and sharing. Tonight, I will go ahead and share our agenda. We've already watched the video, Everyday Intersectionality. Thank you, Dr. Jez, again for the welcome. We will have our solidarity statement and call to action read by Ms. Maisha Wickham. We will also have our panelist introductions. We have two very stout and honored guests with us today, Dr. Wilson and Mr. Morris, who are going to talk to us and have a panel discussion. We will then move to an intersectionality exercise, and from there we will move to a small group dialogue, then a large group share out. We will definitely share some resources. The resources is in an open envelope, open folder. So if you have any other resources that you would like to share on intersectionality, that would be great. And then we will have our closing remarks by Dr. Quesada. Thank you.
As USD doctoral students, faculty, and community in the PhD in Education for Social Justice program, we would like to share a small piece of our solidarity statement and call to action. As students, we stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters, with all of our brothers and sisters, in stating that we stand for Black lives, dismantling white supremacist ideology, systems, and structures in our own institutions, anti-racist and equitable hiring practices, culturally and linguistically relevant, responsive, proficient, and sustaining teaching, the prevention of the loss of innocence of Black, Indigenous, and people of color from the experience of systematic racism, substantial transformation in policies and the institution of policing, advancing teaching and research to call out systematic injustices, especially those that manifest in the institution of education. Deliberately confront inequities with research, data, and evidence that lead to actionable reforms for African Americans and all marginalized populations. You may access the full statement by clicking the link to the right. Michelle?
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maisha. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Roberts. I use she, her pronouns. I zoom in tonight from the indigenous unceded land of the Munsee Lenape in northern New Jersey. We want to say thank you to our panelists for our video, Vei Tsalikis, Joshua A. Campbell, and Michelle Mariglioano. It was so important to make sure that while we know this is a very intelligent and academic group, deeply rooted in the academy as presented from the University of San Diego, that we also took the time to position and to center everyday people. I am not a member of the USD school. I am a community member here learning and growing. And so even for me, it feels wonderful to hear the voices of everyday folks. I think it positions that we all have a role to play in this work and that we all are really complex individuals. So as I think about the testimonies that we were blessed to hear from these three individuals, I would like if everyone would just take a moment, reflect on the video, whether you saw it with us just now, whether you saw it over the course of the week, whether you saw it multiple times, which I'm hoping you did. And if you could just take a chance and think about what is one thing, one word, one phrase that resonates with you, and go ahead and drop that into the chat, and we can start our conversation tonight by hearing from everyone in this written modality. So I'm excited to see what kind of resonated with folks. Nuance, beautiful. Empowered, humanity, transparency, bravery. What else? I think for me, I would say it is the idea of hidden identities that sticks with me. Identity with uniform on and uniform off, connection, intersectionality as a collision. Yes, the phrase Black covered the blue, shifting identities, discrimination and privilege, unassimilated. How I see the world is always intersectional. Yes, beautiful. Keep putting your ideas in. We are going to use this to continue to reference our conversation and as a launching pad for the conversation that we are going to jump into right now. Thank you, Anna. Code switching, Maisha, and the personal is political. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much for that reflection. I'm going to pass it off to Raketa.
Thank you so much. My name is Raketa Thomas, and thank you for facilitating that reflection, Lindsay. That was beautiful. Before we continue, though, let's read through the definition of intersectionality that was shared to us by Crenshaw within the video. So I'll read this slide for you. Intersectionality is a framework to describe how race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics intersect with one another and overlap.
Thank you, Raketa. Appreciate that. So now we will go and introduce our panelists. I have the privilege and honor to introduce to you a colleague of mine, Matthew Morris. Has recently joined Louisville ISD, and ISD stands for Independent School District here in Texas, as the Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. He lives in the DFW Metroplex and has lived there for 10 years and begun his career in Richardson Independent School District. While teaching, Mr. Morris received numerous accolades, including being named one of Richardson's 2018 Teachers of the Year. For the past 4 years, Mr. Morris has traveled across the country with Avid as a staff developer in the area of culturally relevant teaching with aims of transforming educators and empowering students. Being the first generation college student, Avid's mission was close to the opportunity gap, directly aligns with his personal experience. He received his bachelor's degree at Holston-Tillotson University, Austin's oldest institution of higher education. Upon graduation, Mr. Morris dedicated a year of serving the community through AmeriCorps and furthered his education at Teachers College in Columbia University in New York. Having attended both an HBCU and an Ivy League institution, Mr. Morris firmly believes the only difference in the caliber of education is how individual students take ownership of their educational experience. Mr. Morris is dedicated to promoting the validity of all HBCUs and their impact on our society. He is the youngest person to hold the office of president of Holston-Tillotson University International Alumni Association and currently serves as the university's board of trustees. Mr. Morris's mission is to enhance and improve the academic and social outcomes of all students through systems and programs that promote equity in educational practices. He seeks to support professionals in the field of education through honest interaction by providing new, innovative spaces that foster sustainable growth. I would like to introduce once again Mr. Matthew Morris. Thank you, Matthew, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Chanelle Wilson. I will read an abbreviated bio. Dr. Chanelle Wilson is an assistant professor of education in Bryn Mawr Haverford College's education program and the director of Africana Studies at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. Chanelle has served as a public school practitioner teaching secondary education students in the United States and around the world. Her current scholarship focuses on race and anti-racism in education, decolonization of students and the mind, students as teachers and learners, culturally relevant pedagogy in international schooling context, and abolitionist teaching in K-12 settings. Dr. Wilson's life goal is to rethink, reimagine, and revolutionize education to meet the needs of all children. Dr. Wilson is a publicly engaged scholar. She has collaborated with colleagues to inform policy and practice briefs, delivered invited keynotes, workshops, professional development sessions, and training programs for a spectrum of age groups, backgrounds, and variety of contexts and communities, along with producing research articles, book chapters, and presenting at domestic and international conferences. Dr. Wilson is committed to social and racial justice. She is uniquely prepared to support people to engage with concepts of race and justice, encouraging self-introspection for outer transformation. She employs strategies of mindfulness and emotional support with the steady underlying premise of love, joy, and hope. Dr. Wilson is inspired by the continued work of her current and past participants. She truly believes that we can all change the world for the better together. And on a personal note, I can add that she is beautiful inside and beautiful outside. Thank you so much for being here with us, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Lindsay, for those wonderful introductions to today's panelists. And thank you, Matthew and Chanelle, for joining us today for this discussion on intersectionality. I'll start with our first two questions for the evening, and they are actually the very same ones that was shared and that was discussed by our interviewees in the video at the start of this session. And the first two questions are, this is to Chanelle and Matthew, what does intersectionality mean to you and how does it show up in your everyday life? So Chanelle, if you can start.
Happy to be here. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope you've had a good week. We've had some sobering experiences, but the work still continues. And so I'm excited that we're in this conversation together. So thinking about what intersectionality means to me, I I appreciate the terminology intersectionality because everyone lives an intersectional life, but the terminology of intersectionality gives us language to explain and language to analyze our own experiences. And for me, it helps me to understand that everything is happening at once, and that different intersecting forms of oppression can be happening at once, and so and typically are, and that sometimes some identities are foregrounded more than others. And so thinking about visible identities, hidden identities, ones that we ascribe to, and others that are placed onto us, the terminology of intersectionality gives me a framework for processing experiences and for explaining them. And so I always think about intersectionality and critical race theory together, because I'm always looking for a tool that will help me to better understand and or explain something to another person. And intersectionality, as a Black woman who comes from a working class family with, quote, middle class values, and a host of other elements, helps me to navigate the world and decide how I want to show up in the ways I think that it was Josh spoke to. And it also helps me to understand and to prepare for the ways that I may be perceived and how I choose to engage that or reject and disrupt it. So that's what that means to me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Morris.
So good evening. Glad to be with you all today. For me, intersectionality is basically recognizing, or rather acknowledging, that we all live at a crossroads. We engage with multiple identities that inform our daily interactions. Some are more complex than others, but understanding intersectionality is foundational to shifting practices and beliefs of organizations and communities that are engaged in anti-bias work, and that intentionally aim to create a culture of belonging. At the crossroads, or at that intersection, you find one's truth and hopefully their unassimilated self, if they are willing to embrace all aspects of their being. So for me, the journey of identifying and embracing all of what you bring to our world, and in turn sharing that full truth, is the goal and defining factor in intersectionality.
Thank you. I'm going to go off script, and I knew I would because I knew you all would drop gems. And so please bear with me. Can you talk a little bit more about your unassimilated self? I'd love to hear a little more about that.
So I think just the easiest example, I've started a new job. I've moved to a different district. And I say that this district is intentionally adding some chocolate chips to what was known as a sugar cookie. So if you get my drift, there are about 2 chocolate chips in the cookie right now. So it's myself and the general counsel. Black History Month came around, and it's about the middle of the month. We're like, hey, what's going on? Is anything ever going to happen? And she is a Black woman in that space. And I understand that she brings a totally different perspective than myself. And so we have the thing, we came together, we said, you know what? On the day of the board meeting, we're going to wear our kente cloth. And that's big for a Black professional in a new space. And then her conversation moved into, but what about my hair? Right? And my thing was like, I'm gonna blow my hair out. I'm bringing my full self. This is a new job. I can bring my hair. I can bring my kente cloth. I can bring all these pieces of who I am, right? And I don't have to assimilate to worry about, is my hair deemed professional by my colleagues, right? Is my dress deemed professional by my colleagues? Because it doesn't matter, because I'm bringing my truth. Mm-hmm. And so that unassimilated self deals with not putting pieces of yourself to the side. I know as a lot of times we engage in code switching, but code switching and denying yourself are 2 different things. And so as a young professional, I am learning how to balance all of those pieces and bring my full truth to the spaces I navigate every day.
Thank you. Yeah. So like also having the boldness to disrupt the bias of professionalism, right? And even what that means. I love that. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like that tees me up for the next question as we come on the calendar intersection, ending Black History Month, now in Women's History Month. I know when I think about generally like the end of February going into March, I always have my own inner thoughts around which identity I'm leading with first. Am I, as a Black woman identifying individual? And so I'll throw this to you, Dr. Wilson, too. Do you feel that tension between identities? And if so, is there one that you lean into more? Is there one that resonates more with you? Do you have any musings on why that might be? And then I'll toss it really to both of you to think about which identity, if one, are you more aware of, and why you think that might be?
I think that within education as a woman, I'm more, as a woman who from a practitioner or classroom background, I feel more comfortable in my womanness, and the ways that shows up, because in some ways women are expected to be teachers. Women are expected to be these quote nurturers, or all these other things that are assigned, which some are good and others are like, that doesn't make any sense, and that doesn't resonate with me. And so I think that my womanness sometimes is on a back burner because I'm in education, and because I am a teacher educator, and I work at a women's college, and oftentimes the people in my room are primarily women. However, I am in predominantly white spaces, and so my Blackness is the first thing that, when I'm stepping into a new space, or even if it's an older space, a space that I've been in for a while, my Blackness comes first because of the whiteness that typically exists around me. And so I pay more attention to that, and I have in the past, but I'm blessed now where I am. I love, my college has some work. My college has some work. My department is amazing. We also have work, but I love where I am because in our small program, I get to be exactly who I want to be. And I exercise a level of freedom even in academia in a way that is very different from when I was a classroom teacher in a K-12 building. And so I don't have to think about I don't straighten my hair. It doesn't happen. I don't straighten my hair because I just don't feel like it. And it takes a lot of time and energy. And I haven't done it for maybe like 5 years, and it feels good. But when I was a classroom teacher, and I'm remembering my very first job was in a predominantly white district in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I remember I had just come back from a Fulbright, and I was preparing for the interview. And I remember straightening my hair, pulling it back into a bun, putting on pearls, and all of those things, so that I would feel professional and presentable in that space. And so it's my Blackness first, but the womanness is not very far off, because even in K-12 spaces, women aren't typically in leadership roles. And so where it's expected for me to be a classroom teacher, that's cool. I still have to present as this level of modest femininity. And even today, my blouse is a little low, and I'm okay with that. But before, I had to think, after my Blackness, is my Blackness okay? Am I not going to offend someone? Okay, now let's move into this, ideas of femininity and modest femininity. Am I too sexual looking? Does my butt show too much? Or am I like breast compressed enough? Am I taking up too much space? So there, I'd say we're at like a 51-49 with Blackness and womanness. And so the ways that those intersect, and then thinking about my class, I know the skills of middle class. I know the ways of upper middle class. And I do that because what does that actually mean? We got like a $200,000 gap between what it means. And so I know those things. I can switch back and forth, but then class comes into it as well. It's like, okay, now what brand am I wearing? Are my shoes Nine West? Are they Louboutins? What are the ways? Because there's always going to be some way that people will judge. So it's like, okay, race, and then gender, and then class, and then my religion. So there's always those things, and those three primarily show up. But right now, I don't know, man. I'm just feeling so great about like Black History Month, and then moving into Women's History Month. I'm like, yeah, this is my time. This is my time. It's my time all the time. But right now, it's definitely it. So now I feel a lot more proud of those things, and I have the freedom to be able to exercise that.
Awesome. I wear my pearls because they, to me, are the intersectionality of femininity and a Black woman. You know what I mean? Being a member of a,
true.
Yeah,
that's true. But I think the intention behind the use of them, like I love pearls and they're fine, but it's like, what was I doing it for? What I was, I liked them. I liked the style of it, but what I was doing it for was to appease someone else. It wasn't really to necessarily appease myself, even though I thought that they were pretty. So our intentionality in our choices also matters.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morris, I'm gonna ask you the same question.
Thank you. So there are parts of my identity that I can't hide. The skin that I'm in is associated with a plethora of ideas. It's rooted in history, backed by oppressive systems. So in everyday life, I sometimes catch myself, like I said earlier, code switching and giving different pieces of myself based on my personal perception of what parts of me will be accepted, what parts of me will be affirmed, what parts of me will be validated in the spaces I navigate. So recently, my transition to a new district has given me the opportunity to introduce a new self, my full self, an unassimilated self, and bring aspects of myself that I hadn't really been able to bring in professional spaces. And so recently it's been a freeing experience. And I think that freeing experience felt that identity of a man as an educator, which is a privilege that I had never been afforded, even though I've been a practitioner for some years. It's always been my Blackness, right? The thing that I can't hide, the thing that meets you when you come to the door, right? It's my Blackness. And it took me a while to accept that without apology. And I recognize that most people in the spaces that I navigate don't share that dimension of my identity. Thus, I don't aim to deny who I am. The goal is never to assimilate. The goal is never to overcompensate or attack another person's personal bias or their perceived stereotypes, but I'm always aware, right? I'm aware of my Blackness. I'm aware of the words that go unspoken. I'm aware of how others experience me and how that experience can inform how they interact with the next Black man that comes by. I'm aware of that sometimes I'm looked at to be the voice of a nation. I'm looked at to be the voice of all Black people. I'm aware that I've been expected to be a translator for young Black men. I'm aware that I am seen by white colleagues as what I call the Negro whisperer, the disciplinarian, right? I'm aware that my Blackness meets you when you meet me, and that'll never go away. But I've learned to accept that it's a beautiful thing. So yeah, that's how it shows up in my life.
Thank you. Thank you. And I agree with Dr. Lathan that you just wrote a poem called My Awareness. Yes, you did. Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you so much. And I agree, like these nuggets are just awesome. And I really want to sit in this space of awareness, because when we talk about intersectionality, it is that awareness. It is how we lean. You talked about intentionality. So as educators, as practitioners, what considerations should educators take when approaching pedagogy and curriculum through the lens of intersectionality? So Matthew, if you don't mind, if you can start, and then Dr. Wilson, I'll have you pick up because I have an additional question for you.
Yeah, I think oftentimes we have a tendency to approach this work with a checklist versus recognizing that it's an ever-evolving journey. And so in my brief experience, the only consideration that I believe that should be at the forefront is one thing. It's one thing that I always say, that I charge everyone with. how can I become comfortable in being uncomfortable? Right? How can I become uncomfortable in being uncomfortable? Because a lot of times when you get that pushback, it's because someone's pushed out of their comfort zone. But how can I inspire everyone to be okay in that space and recognize that the students that you serve, the communities that you engage, have so many uncomfortable feelings with your presence or how you interact. And so to kind of combat that and to build that relational capacity, you know, that's that phrase we always like to use. To engage, I listen. I think we've lost the simple art of conversation, courageous conversations, hard conversations that are based in truth. But people want to talk, so I try to listen. It's very, very simple. Through engaging and creating safe spaces, you build that trust that's needed to do this work. But you also have to recognize that there are people who are beyond the conversation. Because some of us have been having these conversations for years, and we seek action. But for them, you still have to listen. You got to understand what that journey is, what it has been, what personal actions they've taken, or their inaction, or where their sense of agency was taken away. Right? So having the consistency in that authentic conversation and supporting others in their identified area of need has proven to serve me well. By listening actively and participating in moments that are near to stakeholders' hearts has been kind of the key for me. So I'm always thinking, how can I engage others that give me their time, talent, and their treasure for my initiatives if I haven't engaged in any of theirs beyond a like on social media, right? So growing up, my parents had what I call the ministry of presence. They were always there for everybody, even me. So they were at somebody's something, fully engaged, volunteering, cheering, supporting in whatever was needed. It's that kind of roll up your sleeves and be with you behind the scenes spirit that they had that I hope to embody as I engage stakeholders, and that I encourage you all to do as you move forward in this work too. So it's having that conversation and then having what I'm calling the ministry of presence.
Awesome. Dr. Wilson, if you can expand on that. So once again, you know, we talk about this being intentional, being like Matthew said, being present, being in the moment, in the space. Mm-hmm. So once again, what considerations should educators take when approaching curriculum and pedagogy through the lens of intersectionality?
Yeah. So I think about it that all the time, and I'm not saying that just because we're here. It's always at the forefront of my mind, because right now I get the privilege and the honor and the huge responsibility of preparing future teachers, and I love that about this work that I'm able to do right now. Because I enjoyed what I did in the classroom and I always strived to be better, but I definitely participated in some educational malpractice that I didn't even recognize until I was on the other side and really just learning more and having the opportunity to reflect more deeply on what I do and what I did, and now what I will never do that I did, but I can't go back and make that right. I pray about it, but I can't go back. And so my responsibility now is to train up these new teachers to be exactly who we need them to be, which are people who recognize the intersections of their own identity, but also recognize the intersections of their future students' identity and their full humanity, and being able to do that. So when I think about curriculum and pedagogy, I think about it, in my own classrooms, I do create space. I'm intentional about creating space where my students have the opportunity to bring their full selves in, but also to recognize and see someone else's humanity. Because being able to bring your full self in to a space is one thing, but recognizing, knowing, and understanding how to create that space for others to do the same is very different. And that's not what happens oftentimes in classrooms. Students are, especially students of color, are expected to bring just the part of themselves which are safe for the people who are in the front of the room. And we know that 83% of teachers are white women. And so we can infer that their full self is not welcomed, it is not respected. I'm going back to what Michelle Mariglioano said, and they are not made to feel safe in those spaces, or they begin to recognize and they learn without being explicitly told sometimes, and sometimes they're explicitly told, that some parts of themselves are unwelcome, like explicitly unwelcome, and thus you cannot do that because that makes me uncomfortable, getting to what Matthew's just talked about. And so I try to get my students comfortable with discomfort. I tell them this is a place where you're growing, and if you are uncomfortable, you are exactly where you need to be. It means you're moving forward. Unless you reject it, that's your choice. That has nothing to do with me. But creating space where they can do that, and thinking about curriculum specifically, moving my students beyond representation, moving them beyond diversity. So I used to teach a class. I inherited a class that was called Advocating Diversity in higher education, or in higher education, something like that. And then for a while, I just kept saying advocating for diversity. And so the woman who created the class, one day she said, Chanelle, I noticed that you keep saying advocating for diversity. Why do you do that? I didn't notice that's what I was doing. I didn't know that's not what the class was called. I did it. And so as I thought more about it, I said, well, Allison, like, diversity has always been here. We don't need to advocate for that. Like, it's always been present. It just hasn't been respected. It hasn't been valued. It hasn't been welcomed. Diversity has always been present. So when I think about advocating for diversity, that came naturally to me because the diversity is here. What we need to do are fix the systems so that the diversity that has always been present can be included, can be fully integrated. So moving curriculum and our practices beyond, where we allow our students to maybe write just a little bit about themselves at the beginning of the year, and then when they get to senior year, when they're supposed to write their personal statements, but everything in between teaches them to operate in the principles, practices, and beliefs of whiteness, which is how I was taught. Right. As a trained teacher who came out of a 4-year program, at the top of my class, being the first Black one, I was trained in the practices of whiteness, and I didn't even realize it. And I had been taught to be very proud of who I was, to be a proud Black woman. I didn't know who Gloria Ladson-Billings was. And I didn't graduate that long ago, y'all. I promise you I did not. And so I recognize that that's what happens traditionally. And so what I have to do is disrupt it. And every single one of my classes, whether it's an education course or writing arts, we're talking about race, we're talking about class, we're talking about gender, we're talking about religion, we're talking about power, privilege, and oppression. It's always present. It is never not a part of the conversation. And so now my students expect it, but that hasn't been normalized.
And I love how you talked about, this process of having your students be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So, like, how do you present that to your class, especially in the time and the moment that we're in right now? And what you said is so true. How we train our new teachers is quite different how we were trained. Mm-hmm. So how do you encourage them to be reflective in that process of being uncomfortable, but being comfortable at the same time?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I try to model that for them. I talk about it explicitly at the beginning of the class. The very first day, we're going to talk about real stuff. If that makes you uncomfortable, beautiful. But I also try, like I said, I try to create space. And so I do a lot of work with building classroom community so that people feel as if the space is ready for each of us to engage in that way. And I appreciate, well, I won't precursor. We're going to talk about this brave space. I don't know if y'all have done this before, but I saw that on the PowerPoints and I appreciated it because sometimes people say safe space, but safety is not where we need to be because everybody ain't safe.
Right.
And most of us live in relative unsafety most of our lives. And then we are, as a Black woman, I am expected to make this space safe for white people. That's what people talk about that's what people are referring to sometimes when they're talking about safety. They're talking about safeness for people who are in the majority, for dominant, identities, and for ones that get to take on this role of oppressor, whether they recognize it or not. And so safety for whiteness is not my priority. And I think that that's something else that I say to my students. And I can say that because of where I am. It's a liberal arts institution, a small place. And so I'm not saying everybody should say that, but I tell them that's not my job. And that used to feel like my job. And I have completely rejected that. And so it's not that I'm trying to make this space only safe for people of color, but I like brave space because it requires us to operate in ways that haven't been normalized. And for me, that means that white people have to listen, and that people of color get the opportunity to feel as if they can share without being judged, without having to validate what they just said, without having to teach people. And so I don't look to my students to be representative. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I try not to do what has happened to me. Right. So I don't want them to be a representative. I want them to feel okay to share. And if they so choose, that's literally their experience. And then I say, are there other ways of thinking? Are there other things that people are thinking? Or I bring in people from like YouTube or podcasts or whatever, people who have decided to put their life and their reflexivity on display for other people to learn from. That's not the job of my students. So I think that the classroom community is the most important piece, because then once you have a human connection with another person, you want them to be okay. And so if you're thinking about something that you're not sure, maybe you just won't say it. If you think something sounds racist, maybe you just won't say it. Or maybe you'll say, I'm not sure how to say this. Please help me, right? And so that's what I hope that my students are able to do. And oftentimes they are. And it's helpful that they feel the sense of community, but also they feel as if they're valued in that space, because they challenge me, they push back on some of the things that I say. And that doesn't make me always feel comfortable. But then I have to do the same thing. I'm like, okay, all right, I can handle this. Like, just because I'm adult or just because I'm the guide of that community doesn't mean that I don't have something to learn from my students. So yeah, that's what I try to do. Works sometimes, not all the time, to be honest.
I appreciate what you said, because it brought back flashbacks of, so I used to be a history teacher. And so, you know, when you talk about history, you know, one of the things that I hated most is when you had to do that project and you're like, oh, so where did you come from? Where did your people? And I'm just like,
you know where I came from.
Right. But then again, it's like even Black people have so much intersectionality. Like I tell people, you know, I'm Cajun, I'm a Cajun Indian, I'm half French Canadian. You know, I might not look it in my features, but it's like Black people are just not Black. Right. It's like we've lived in this country and it's not a melting pot. There are so many different pieces. And I love how you say how you talk to your teachers, because I cringed, even when I was in college, when they were like, oh, so Michelle, so what do Black people think? I can only speak of myself. So, I mean, it's just one of those conversations that we have to make sure that, our teachers are aware of the multiple parts. Like when I was teaching, I always said, you got to know your kids, by name and need. And that's almost like even by intersections, right? Because our kids come with so much wealth, beauty, and knowledge that we have to embrace that. So I appreciate you so much in what you do. And then Matthew, if you can definitely talk about in your space of where, being a director of DEI and, and having to present on equity and, and inclusion, how do you get, stakeholders and teachers and school leaders to be uncomfortable, but comfortable?
To be honest, I don't know. But in the same sense, I think that's the beauty of it, is being vulnerable in the spaces that I navigate. So the same thing that Dr. Wilson said that she uses with her students is what I've been using with the board members and the community members that I've been having those conversations with, is I'm vulnerable, I'm transparent, I lay it all out on the line. And that's part of the beauty of being the new guy in the space and being the outsider coming in, is that I'm able to ask a question that I know is a very deep challenge, but at the same spaces, I'm new, so I didn't know. So I'm just asking why we are so concerned that all of our white students have met target, but we don't even mention our Hispanic students, our English language learners, who are falling extremely far behind, especially within the last 3 months. And so I can ask that question and be like, not necessarily it's problematic in what you've been doing, but in this meeting, why didn't no one bring up the question? Mm-hmm. We were concerned about students not being able to have prom and graduation and some of the things that the upper middle class is pushing towards. But I'm trying to see, why are my third grade babies not meeting the lowered targets that you have for them? Because the second question is, why are their targets so low in comparison to their white counterparts? Mm-hmm. So it's having kind of that transparent conversation. It's being vulnerable, but going to those old proverbs and platitudes. Grandma used to always say, you catch more flies with honey. So recognizing, how can I give a little bit of honey? But then I'm very honest in the beginning. I'm saying, I'm not going to always be a good taste in your mouth, but that's what I'm here for. I'm here to question and not necessarily challenge, but to work together to figure out what is our solution and how do we move forward in this community. So to answer your question, long story short, I don't know. I'm figuring it out. I think it's all a process and a study, but I'm excited and I am hopeful in the journey that is ahead.
I like what you said about it's not that you're challenging, it's the question, and when to notice when to question, right? And I think also that's with intersectionality, right? It is seeing what people have routinely unseen, uncovering, and the beauty and the ugliness of just the things around us, right? And even within ourselves. I mean, there's some things that we have to, work on, even within, ourselves and our pieces of our intersectionality. And, in our, in our courses, we talked a lot about, being vulnerable and what that means. And I think what you were talking about with bees and honey, I think vulnerability is the honey, right? Because when people can see that, you know what, I struggle with this too, but I'm not going to, like what Chanelle said, I'm not here to, we're here to think and process. We're here to question. So I appreciate those, your answers, because I think it speaks to that complexity when we talk about intersectionality, but it also talks about what we should do in order to question or be able to see the unseen. So I appreciate that.
So I'm going to be honest, I am not as prolific and as comfortable with my uncomfortableness as so many of you all appear to be. So but I've gained so much just from listening to you, and I write a lot of notes, and a lot of the words that came out, that being unapologetic, that intentionality, the awareness, the ministry of presence, all these words I'm really taking to heart, and I think a lot of our list of our participants and our listeners are as well. But I want to take us back to, there are two things that you both said that I really feel like play well together. Dr. Wilson said everything can happen at once, and that includes forms of oppression. And so that intersectionality, having that definition, that framework, it provides the framework for processing our experiences And Matthew, you mentioned also that we find truth in that intersectionality. So bearing all of that in mind, and everything else that you shared with us tonight, the question is, how do you see intersectionality playing a role in Black Lives Matter movement? Matthew, you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it brief. I think intersectionality allows leaders to acknowledge that there's not a monolithic experience. How one perceives their place in our society is formed by the varied aspects of their identity, as well as social interactions. Not to deny another's truth, because truth is found in the intersectionality, but to gain a deeper rooted bond or a shared understanding in one aspect of our identity, which is the Blackness, the center, the first word of the movement. The challenge remains, though, that many of us hold multiple aspects of identity that have been disenfranchised. As it was spoken in the video, as Dr. Wilson spoke, being a woman, being LGBTQIA, all these other pieces that we bring to the table. And at times it seems we're asked to deny a part of our truth to preserve the goal of the masses. And that's an extremely difficult space to navigate, but understanding it is not. And so I think that understanding an intersectionality, of understanding that, yes, this person is walking with me, leading with me in the movement, but they have so many other pieces based in their religion, based in their upbringing, based in their social and economic status, based on how they've received racism in their childhood or the lack thereof, that they bring all of that to the space. And yes, we have a common goal, but I have to realize that if I am dedicated to the fight for Black lives, I must also remain dedicated to the fight for LGBTQIA. I must also remain dedicated to the fight for women and equity in that spaces. I must also dedicate myself to the fight for those who do not have the resources that I have. And so I cannot just be dedicated to one piece, but again, the issue becomes burdensome, and it becomes heavy because it becomes so much, because the system has been set up to make it to where we carry the load. And it ends up being the Black woman who ends up carrying the brunt of the entire load. And she is to take care of her babies who don't have money and don't have shoes on their feet. And she's to take care of her Black men. And she's to take care of her lesbian sisters. She's to take care of all of those things. And so I think just acknowledging that there is no monolithic experience, that the weight is extremely heavy, and we just need to even the load, and recognize that to get to the goal, we don't have to deny the other pieces that we bring in our truth.
I appreciate that. I am thinking, and I appreciate pointing out even the marginalization of women in Black Lives Matter, because women started, just the hashtag, if you will, the movement, the foundation, although the work had been happening for so long, but Black women were a part of that as well from the very beginning. And one of the things that I wrestle with is how easy it is for people to forget, LGBTQ people, IA plus people in the community, how easy it is for people to even forget women in Black Lives Matter. And they talk very deeply about men and men in police brutality, which is, it's genocide, but there are other people involved. So I wonder how we can be more intentional about recognizing the marginalization that exists even within the Black Lives Matter movement. And it doesn't mean that the leadership are women, but the ways that other people interpret it, and your average person who's not involved in necessarily the leadership of it, the ways that other people from the outside look in, they're always talking about the men who are a part or who have lost their lives due to police brutality, and not everyone else. And so even within Black Lives Matter, there's still this oppression, these levels of hierarchy and oppression that exist, and we have to be intentional about speaking that truth and recognizing that we can speak that truth without that being a destructive critique of the movement. And I think that that's something else that's difficult for people to talk about. Like if there's some critique, it's like, oh, you can't critique. You can't critique because if it looks like we're not united, then someone else can intervene and divide us. And so recognize that critique should be a part of the conversation. And it reminds me of like what is it? Like suffrage, right? So the way back, Black women were a part of the suffrage movement as well, but they still didn't get to. So people say, oh, women earned the right to vote. No. White women earned the right to vote in the 1920s. Black women did not get the right to vote till the late 1960s. Let's be clear. But then even back then, when Black men were like, all right, y'all let us get this real quick, and then we're gonna bring y'all along almost 50 years later. Happy? No shade. But you see what I'm. So we have to be able to constructively critique and recognize the full complexity of it and be prepared to respond to the full complexity. And it doesn't mean that everyone needs to do everything, because we can't. But if all of us take up something, and don't forget the women, don't forget the people who are usually toward the bottom of the hierarchy, then we can be fully uplifting. And another thing that I think about when I think about Black Lives Matter, I always go back to critical race theory. That's what I do. And specifically say critical race curriculum, it reminds us of the interlocking systems of oppression, which is intersectionality, but it also recognizes that Black people aren't the only people who are suffering in this country. And so the more that we can align ourselves with multiple movements and recognize that we're all in the fight together, and I think that we do. I think that we, as Black people, we know that, and Black people do carry everyone's burden and are expected to, and sometimes take it up to the point where we're fighting no longer for ourselves, but we're trying so hard to show how much we care that we take everyone else on and aren't intentional about. No, this y'all don't have to agree with me on this, but we aren't intentional about prioritizing ourselves at the same time. And so it reminds me of like my women friends who are mothers, right? I have one today. I was supposed to take her to dinner, and she's like, "Oh, I can't. I got to do this. I got to do that." And so often, Black people and similarly women, they will prioritize everyone else and just be like, okay, I'm gonna get to us. And so how do we create this space where we can be working, where we're still prioritizing ourselves, but recognizing that we're a part of other movements as well? And how do we create spaces of solidarity that make space for all of us? And I think that that's fighting against white supremacy and the patriarchy. It's easy to try to divide groups because then it's more helpful. That if we're all divided, we can't be working together, but we haven't figured out yet how to work together in sustainable ways. And it doesn't mean that we're not making forward progress, but these sustainable ways, I don't have the answers. It's just something that I'm recognizing as I'm moving through the work, because I do the same thing. I can't prioritize everything, but when I do prioritize, it's often never me. And it's never the things that are deeply rooted in what I actually want to do. And I don't know, I don't have the answer, but I'm just thinking about it even now. I have like 8 million to-do lists. And then today I felt guilty about getting my nails done because I had meetings and I had emails to send. And it's just like this idea of preservation, and joy and hope in struggle are important too. So that's intersectional as well. I don't know, y'all. We got work to do. Let's all take up something and keep it moving.
Oh man, absolutely. And I have to admit that, so this next question is not really part of our scripted questions, and I love scripts.
Okay, look at you going off script.
I'm so sorry.
No, do it. Love it.
No, it's really, so I'm going to pose this as a yes or no, but I'm really not asking a yes or no question. I want you to elaborate on this. And because, so background, I have learned to love my armor. Good, bad, indifferent, whatever you may think of it. And so my question is, even with having this belief in everything you have uttered today, can one truly be dedicated to this work? Can one truly get to that goal that Matthew and Chanelle, you both have expressed, if you are comfortable in that armor? And we've talked about vulnerability and intentionality and all of these different things. So what's the next step if it's a no, basically? And can you elaborate a little bit more?
I say yes. If you're at the place where you can identify your limits, you can identify where you are uncomfortable, you know the spaces that you navigate. I think that goes into the intersectionality of understanding what your truth is, right? You can talk about everything except for my weight. I know I navigate as a big woman, but that is not the thing that I'm comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with all of that, because that goes into a deeper root of childhood pain, right? And I'm just not in that space now. I may be at that space later, but I'm not comfortable with that. So I think, yes, you can, because one, you do, and you can understand the people who are dealing with the same thing as you, or you can understand people who you can kind of, who are similar with challenges. So my simple answer is yes. I remain hopeful, so yes.
I like the hope. I'm waiting.
I think that boundaries are necessary. And recognizing limits is not a weakness, it's a strength, because it then creates the space for someone else to take up the work, for someone else to step in. And I'm not saying I do that well. I am not. I am a person who will not say no. I'm a person who will withstand. I'm better now than I was even just last year, but I am a person who will lay down and ask people to lay on top of me for their benefit, however many people wish to do so. And that's not healthy. And before, and I had this, I was raised, and I don't think that my mother wanted this, but I was raised with this concept of the strong, independent Black woman that, and my mother had to exercise that because she had to. And now she's older, she's married, and she's acting like this whole different person who I'm like, who is this soft person? Like, who are you? And I was talking to my therapist because I'm like, my mom is so weird right now. I don't even know who she is. I don't know why she's acting like this. And my therapist was like, maybe this is who she always was. She just couldn't be. And that was like sobering, like, all right, now that's what I paid you $50 for. But but really having boundaries and recognizing that we have limits, and we have limits for a reason. And that when we reach our limit, it's okay to take a step back and allow someone else. And if we keep trying to push ahead and move forward beyond our limits, it's harmful for us, potentially harmful for the movement, but also it doesn't create the space for someone else to learn, for someone else to grow, for someone else to step in and do what is within their what's within their purpose. And so boundaries and limits are necessary because it makes space. And our goal of moving forward should be to do what we can, and then make space for others to do the same. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I definitely believe there's room for chipping away at those things as well. But I was just, because I feel like, you run into people that, yes, the vulnerability needs to be there. Absolutely, 100%. But if you're not there yet, can you continue with the work? And from what I'm hearing from both of you, it's a yes, but you also have to understand where you're coming from, kind of reflect about your own self, where you're willing to go with things, what your limits are, as you both mentioned, and if there is room and space to be brave enough and to chip away at that armor and get past some of that uncomfortable feeling, so to speak. But I was curious, and thank you so much for answering that. Go ahead.
One more thing. And thinking about people's limits and where they're not quite ready, something I've had to become comfortable with is recognizing that we're not all going to get there at the same time. And right. So sometimes I would want my students to like get this by the end of the semester. And then I realized like that's a colonialist way of thinking. Like that's not how learning happens at all. But something that we can do is drop a seed. And then right. It's maybe not my job to water it. Maybe I'm the seed. I'm waiting for somebody else to water me in order for me to better understand something, to do something else. So recognizing that we can get there, We will get there, but potentially we need more life experience, or we just haven't come into contact with that one person or this one, set of circumstances that are really going to solidify something and help us to get where we want to be, or where we think we want to go, or where we don't even know we can get to. But somehow we end up there like, wow, I never would have thought about this 10 years ago. Never would have thought about this 15 years ago. So like the timing of when we get where we go, it's not within our control.
I hear you. So I want to be mindful of all of our time as well. I apologize. I just got lost in the moment. But Michelle, if you can take us out of transition us back to our next activity. Thank you, panelists, for sharing everything that you've shared tonight. And there are some questions. I feel like there's a lot going on in the chat. So if there are some questions in the chat as well, I do want to be able to address those as well. So Michelle, take it over.
Yes, thank you so much. Once again, this has been great. The conversation, the nuggets are just like, I gotta watch this again because it's very powerful, and I think it's something that we all wrestle with. And it's these conversations that we need to have. And I really thank the both of y'all for creating that space so we can have these conversations. And so if you don't mind, if there are any questions, maybe we'll take maybe one or two before we transition into our next activity for our breakout. If any of our guests would like to ask the panelists a question, we will definitely offer that up at this time.
I think the biggest question is everyone wanting to sign up to Dr. Wilson's classes.
We definitely have fun.
All right.
So thank you, everyone. So to transition us into a little bit of time to be together in the behind the scenes spaces, if I can steal a phrase from Mr. Morris, I just want to look at the questions that have framed the entire evening of what does intersectionality mean to you and how does it show up in your everyday life? We also heard a lot about doing some of that introspective work. And so we wanted to give an opportunity to look at our own identities, our own intersectionality, to really give ourselves a chance to explore a number of the things that have been brought up in the conversation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give us just maybe 5 minutes to look through these questions on our own and let that continue to fuel the conversation that we've already had. This is an activity adapted from the Safe Zone. And these questions will help us to kind of start to think about, where does our awareness lie? Where are these hidden identities for us? Which identities have we been socialized to prioritize and which ones have we not, and why? So I'm going to allow you a little bit of introspection time, about 5 minutes. We're going to give you a little thinking music. And so I encourage you to really take advantage of this opportunity to look through these questions and to really start to do some of that processing work. bring us out of our, oh, the musician in me was like, where's the musical transition out? All right. Thank you, everyone. But yes, let's go ahead. I hope that this was able to jog some thinking for you and some processing. I'm going to pass it on so that we can move into a brief breakout session and be able to just speak to each other in those behind the scenes brave spaces.
So at this time, we're going to go ahead and break out into smaller groups to kind of have that level of intimacy and be able to be vulnerable with one another. These are the guidelines that we would like you to take with you as you move into these smaller groups. And so the brave space for dialogue includes listening with intentionality. That seems to be a hard word. And be okay with awkward silences. Speak your truth, share authentically, and use I statements. Respect confidentiality. If it's not your story, be sure you've asked permission. Experience and lean into the discomfort. There's been a lot of phrases around being comfortable with that discomfort tonight. So let's try to move forward with that as well within our small groups. Be mindful of time so that all can share. Recognize that this is unfinished work. Recognize communication styles and examine your own assumptions and perceptions. So let's move over to our spaces for dialogue. And I do have to add that in those spaces, we are thinking of those questions that we just reflected upon that Lindsay shared with us. And we're thinking of those two questions from the interviews as well, which, Lindsay, can you remind us of those two questions?
Sure. What does intersectionality mean to you, and how does it show up in your everyday life? So we'll go into breakouts. We'll be there for about 7 minutes. This is just a continuation of a conversation that we know you will then enter your evening plans with, but just to give us a chance to be in community in a little bit smaller scale. We'll go for about 7 minutes.
Wow. Amazing.
So I don't know if your breakout group was as good as my breakout group, but
Ours probably was better. Sorry.
But I just want to thank everyone that has gotten to this place. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left for tonight, but maybe if each group could share out a little bit, and that would be really appreciated. So if anyone wants to go.
All right, Casey, going to start us off for our group, please.
Yes, for some reason I can't get the music to stop, and it's really loud.
Right.
Can someone turn it down just a tad? Like I guess if it's fine if not. So yeah. Can you hear?
Dr. Jazz, are you able to turn it off?
I don't have the music on.
We had the music the whole time while we were in our breakout room. That's why you guys had nothing over us, okay?
Yeah.
So you have to hit next on the slide. I don't have the music.
Oh, it's my personal thing. Hold on, sorry.
Okay.
I will share in just one moment.
Casey always comes to class with her music.
There we go. I was having so much trouble focusing. I'm like trying to listen. All right.
And meanwhile, you're thinking, what is she doing? Why did she play the music?
I know.
Anyway, well,
okay. So yeah, we had a wonderful conversation and talked a lot about like how to show up and be present with our different identities, and just acknowledging that we all have different parts of ourselves that have different interactions with the spaces that we're in, whether it's being a mother and being a professional, or being a person of color in different settings. And one of the big things we touched on was that it's important for all of us to show up, that though we might have different lived experiences, and it's important that every single person shows up and be their authentic self, and be honest and real about what we're coming to the table with, because we truly need everyone to be involved in this, in these discussions and the work. So yeah, if there's anything else I forgot, feel free to share, group.
Beautiful job. Thank you, Casey. We're thankful for you. Yes. All right.
Oh, also, I just want to add, thank you so much to everybody and the panelists. This has been really wonderful, and it's been a great, great time.
I'll go quickly for our group. Yes, very wonderful space with wonderful group of women. We talked about being there for each other, solidarity, especially in the moment that we're in. Talking about, this is a fight for our lives, and recognizing that we have to remember what we're fighting against. And I'm going to take that from Dr. Wilson. We've got to remember who when we say that we're in solidarity, we've got to remember what we're fighting against, and we have to remember that what that solidarity looks like, and being there for each other. And just being present. I think that's what Casey said, showing up. And I think the other one, and I'm going to use Reverend Al Sharpton, we got to show up, we got to show out, because just talking about it in this space does no good. It's not social justice, and it denies our whole premise of what we talk about with protected space and fighting for our being, for our presence here. So I want to thank our group. It was wonderful.
I can share for our group since I was voluntold. I think we all discussed, like, we had like people who are coming to terms with what intersectionality means and what identities are being placed for us versus what we've internalized, right? I brought up the point where, like, Raketa brought up a great point about what our armor is. And I feel that my armor is, let me explain to you all my identities as I meet you for the first time, because you're going to try to put me into what you feel is my group or what you want to identify me as. And we can't have a human discussion until that's been pronounced in some capacity. And so I use that as an armor of, I'm tired of the, where are you from? No, where are you really from? No, where your family's from? Like, and so it felt beautiful to be in a space with predominantly people of color, because I don't feel the bravery as much as in the other spaces that I'm in, right? Where there's that relational, I think we all had tons of head nods of like, yes, I feel the same way, or yes, that comes up for me too. And I think these are beautiful affinity spaces that need to continue on for us.
All right. We want to share about some of the resources?
Yes, thank you, everyone. So this next slide, I would like to thank and also thank Dr. Jez for recommending this group to us, this organization. It's Great Lakes Equity Center, and they have different divisions. There's a Midwest, and there's also a Western division. And I would really encourage you to look on their websites. They do an awesome job. And so these are some of the resources that Great Lakes shared with us. And once again, once you look through these resources, if there are any other resources that you could share within the folder, then please let us know, because once again, it's that wealth of knowledge where we can once again show up and show out.
Thank you. And I also want to put a shout out for Jennifer, who has been curating our resource list on the website. And so she also, if you send us things, then we add it there as well. All right. And Tomei was going to talk to everyone about our next event.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Such a wonderful event. I felt like I was at church. My screen was off and I was back here like, yes, doing all kinds of stuff. And saying preach. So for our next event, it's Unearthing Greater Healing Consciousness within the BLM movement, Black Lives Matter movement. And it's really to address the heaviness of the current climate with what's happening with the racial violence and the anniversaries of Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery and their murders. And we're going to do a workshop that's to really engage in the roots of our narratives and help us unpack the emotional, psychological, and physical elements of the harm that we're experiencing by naming it. You know, I like to say, name the thing, the thing. That's my what I really believe in, and develop a healing consciousness or a deeper one for those who already have one, and identify ways we can really transform our work by doing the inner work ourselves. And that will be Friday, April 23rd from 4 to 5:30 p.m. PST time.
Thank you. And I also want to give a shout out to Zulema, who had made this beautiful flyer for us. She has been doing the artwork for most of our flyers, and she is just such a phenomenal asset to the group. So thank you, Zulema. Joseph?
All right. Well, what a great session tonight. I really enjoyed everything that I've heard. To the speakers, the panel, you guys are awesome. I really look forward to inviting you to other events. There's space for you. We want you guys to continue doing what you're doing, making an impact, blazing trails in your space, and then bringing it out to communities such as ours to help impact change. So I'm just so thrilled of this whole event. You guys put it together so well. I'm just so grateful how everything went. The music that we were listening to, that was so cool. But I just want to say that this has been really what I like most about the event is I think that was really one of the times that we felt a space to really be ourselves. I think it was kind of like a healing type of event where we actually were able to be ourselves authentically and not be afraid. And if we can get that feeling everywhere we go, this is how we can really feel like we reach what I believe a heaven on earth state of mind. So this is what I really gonna take from this event, how everyone were able to be themselves freely and felt good in doing so. All right. So I don't want to take any more time. I want to introduce one of my very good friends in the chair of our department and professor of the learning and teaching is the department that has sponsored this event, okay, under SOULS. Dr. Reyes Quezada, EDD. He writes and teaches in the areas of bilingual education, K through 12, teacher education recruitment, issues on faculty of color, instructional models, home school community partnerships, experiential education, and physical education through adventure-based programs. So you can see he's been doing a lot for many, many years. All right. He came to USD in 1999 from the University of Redlands. And prior to that, he taught at California State University, San Celeste. He has also lectured from California State University, San Bernardino, San Diego State University, and the Washington Center for Academic Seminars in Washington, D.C. Among his articles are K through 12 teacher education recruitment, implications for teacher education quarterly, developing diverse faculty and culturally proficient education programs, Journal of Multicultural Education, and forming homeschool community partnerships among bilingual communities, the School Community Journal. So as you can see, he has a resume of experience that really we are honored to have as a chair of our department to lead us and to bring into his rich background, his lived experience to help lead us as we continue to fight social justice and inequity in our position from the University of San Diego standpoint. I bring to you our own Dr. Reyes Quezada for closing remarks. Please welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lathan. I know probably some of you noticed that maybe my screen was blank for a couple of times during the session, but I think like everyone else, Dr. Jazz and Dr. Estrada, we've been in Zoom meetings all morning since 9 o'clock, so that's why I'm also standing up at at this point, but this was great work from the videotape on the topic on intersectionality with Josh in terms of his experience as a poet, artist. I really enjoyed his key concept on the issue of being a part of versus what one wants to participate in. And again, that we as individuals make those choices, and also in terms of Victoria as the next police officer and the availability in terms of being able to adapt in terms of to intersectionality from the topic of Black is covered by the blue in terms of her being a police officer, and again how different community members or youth were able to see her in different sectionalities. In our little small group earlier, I mentioned that here you see me with a tie and coat, but tomorrow I'm gonna go visit my father, who's a farm worker who was here illegally in the early 50s, and I came from Mexico as well as an immigrant. So I'm gonna have to wear my hat tomorrow. But when I come back to the campus, I'm my tie and coat and being that mainstream individual. But again, in terms of Victoria's intersectionality, in terms of being able to adapt, and also in terms of Michelle and her sons, who she was really able to somewhat work with them in terms of being able to reflect in terms of their own positions, and being able to really know and be able to identify what's right and what's wrong, and having them really come up with and confront, whether it's their friends, if they are speaking on those particular issues. So really enjoyed that. Obviously, then I think I missed the first part in terms of maybe the panel, but I caught the last group, which there was a panel, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Chanelle Wilson, where do you get all this energy? You really need to pass it to us. So excited in terms of your thoughts and the importance in terms of your comment about classroom community is the most important space, and how we build that in our own classroom with our pre-service teachers, or in our own work with teachers as well, or other educators. And Michelle and Rakita and Lindsay, what a great job in facilitating the sessions. I think somebody kind of comes in that doesn't know what you're doing. They're probably thinking, well, gee, these are TV hosts. They will really carry the conversation in terms of professional manner, but more in terms of like, boy, they've been doing this for years. And again, really hearing again Dr. Wilson's comments, and Matthew. Again, the reason I'm standing up because I've been in a session for 3 hours where we're developing the questions for our Vice Provost of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I go, oh man, did he apply to our position? Or can I sneak in his application still at this point, as we're moving forward in terms of University of San Diego, and really making that position much more visible in terms of what the role will be of the VP of DE&I within our own institution. So again, great thoughts from your remark. I really connect with that in terms of, you're right. We see every day I watch. I think the only thing I watch at 6:30 is World News, and where they're talking about priorities in terms of different schools. Yes, we got to have graduation. It's so important for all our kids. Yet, I see pictures of migrant children in Salinas who are at the McDonald's in the parking lot trying to get internet connection. So the different worlds that different families really live in, and what the reality is in terms of those the kids who need more help and support. The issue in terms of brace space was really brought up, and also in the chat, I was keeping track of the chat rooms. in terms of ministry of presence, and obviously the educational malpractice, and those are some of the examples I think that were provided to the entire group. So how do we assist the students who are not doing well again, and how do we support them? I didn't catch, and maybe that happened during the early part, about the bees and the honey, and I think that was maybe you, Matthew, that maybe brought that up, but I didn't catch that part. So I'd like to hear more about the bees and the honey concept. And again, the whole issue in terms of the which I truly agree that the complexities of intersectionality, it's not easy. It needs to be. I think maybe it was Dr. Wilson that needs to be much more intentional, and it needs to be having that understanding. So it's not an easy task. Some of the common themes that came about were the issue about common goal by allies. How do we dedicate for the many and not one particular piece, and not being monolithic in terms of the experience, but how do we support each other and our different allies, whether it's LGBTQ+ or Latinx or white Caucasian allies, in terms of support of the different challenges that we're confronted with. And again, so it's that issue in terms of needing to unify, to fight for each other, for the many and not one piece. So how do we do that? And again, in our own little group, we had a great conversation in terms of the different topics. So I think Matthew, you mentioned in terms of what is your truth? How do we really take into that, and what are you comfortable with? So knowing your truth, being comfortable, and being able to articulate those experiences are really well, and truly agree with Dr. Wilson in terms of again knowing your boundaries and knowing the limits and necessary, and be able to acknowledge it so you can move forward. So what can you do, and where do you need help? We all need help in our own situations, so being able to acknowledge and help with that. And then I love that again in our own little small group, going back to the music. It was nice to just hear the jazz transition that really kind of calmed me down, and enjoyed our conversation in our group. So again, I apologize if I was blanked out in terms of the screen, but I was there the whole time. I was probably thinking, I bet you Dr. Jazz and Dr. Lee, oh my God, what's going to happen? Are we going to get anyone to summarize anything? And I know Dr. Estrada, I know you sent me a text, but I was there the whole time.
I think I can all agree with Tomei on, I think it was Tomei that was saying, I felt like I was in church, because it was an absolutely phenomenal community building piece, ritual, I would even say, that we have brought to the department. So thank you, everyone. We do just have one last slide, and Michelle's gonna kind of close us out with a quote.
Yes, and thank you again for everyone. I know we're running a little late, but this was a great space, a great time, and I really appreciate you spending that time with us. So closing with a quote from Kimberly Crenshaw. This idea that we all have the same life is false. Race, class, gender come together to shape the life chances of people in very different ways. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Dr. Jez. Thank you, Dr. Lathan. Thank you, Dr. Quesada. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for making this this event great. Thank you.
You
so
guys
much.
were awesome.
Have a good night.
Great job, guys. I'm so thankful for this whole event. Thank you.